Welcome to the Faithful Fathering Podcast. This is Rick Wirtz, founder and president of Faithful Fathering, where we work to encourage and equip dads to be faithful fathers, dads that are engaged in raising a godly generation and are working to reinvigorate their church on the fathering front. In this podcast series, we've been talking about a Father's Day month to use not just one day to celebrate fathering, but to live into what we're called to be as fathers. When the Heavenly Father shares the moniker Father with us, that comes with a tremendous responsibility that we need to live into. So I've used these podcasts and my brother here in studio with me to help encourage you on this journey. And from the podcast, please visit faithfulfathering.org for other resources on the For Dads button or the For Churches button. And then there's also a Connect page that gives you some other resources, including the Father's Day Challenge that would encourage and equip you on this journey of being the father you're called to be. In the studio with me, as I said, is my brother, Robert Valle. Robert, thanks again for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Rick.
You know, one of the things that we're always concerned about as dads is helping our kids walk in their gifts. And of course, I wanted my kids to be tennis players, so I had them out on the court running lines at ages 2 and 4. And for some reason, they didn't fall in love with the game of tennis like I had thought they would. And as a dad, that's pretty hard to accept that your kid isn't in love with the same things that you love. Now, you've never had that problem, have you?
No, not at all. I'm going to ask you the how much time you got question again, because that's right up my alley. We, my childhood dream, as I mentioned before, was to be a radio mix show DJ. That's all I cared about before I got saved. So then once I surrendered my life to the Lord, I left music alone for 9 years. And as my firstborn son, was growing up, I could see that there was an interest in music, but I didn't want him to know the life that I lived in the music industry. I was being on the radio. I was in the nightclubs 6 nights out of the week. I always kept a day job, but I was always out with, we were just partying all the time. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't always involved in that, but as a DJ, you're the entertainment. So, you're there and you're experiencing it all. And I didn't want that for my kid after I got saved. So I didn't say anything about me being involved in music for the first, I want to say maybe 7 years of his life. And then he was watching something on TV. And I said, son, I could tell that he liked music. I said, son, what instrument do you want to play? And there was a kid that played in the background, and he played keyboards, but he also had a DJ set up. He had 2 turntables. And my son said, Dad, I want a BMC twist. And he goes like that with the record, just like DJs do. And I was like, man, it's in this kid's blood. He doesn't know anything about who I was, because for a moment, I had a lot of exposure within Houston, and then we branched out into other cities and states, and we were on XM radio. So he didn't know any of that. I didn't want him to know any of that. But then I got to a point where I was like, man, it's in this kid's blood. So I started asking brothers, what do I do? And they're like, look, you can either show him how to honor God with the gifts and talents that he has, and you can guide him through it, or you can just leave it alone, and somebody else if he really likes it, he's going to find somebody else to teach him, and you don't know what they're going to teach him. So I kind of started teaching him who I was and showed him some videos of me when I was on the radio, and even started DJing again. And then a couple of years after that, now I'm back into DJing again, Rick, and I'm doing Christian radio, and I'm doing podcasts, and he just turns the other way and gets involved into sports and leaves everything that I knew, because I don't know anything about sports. My thing was music and DJing, and he just goes full force into sports, and he absolutely loves anything and everything having to do with sports. And now I still do the DJing stuff on for Christian events and Christian radio and things like that. But he'll help me from time to time when I need him to do events. But his thing is sports, and I get to it's kind of the other way around. He's drugged me into what he likes, mm-hmm. and I love it, because there's nothing like being interested in what he's interested in, as opposed to the other way around, to where it almost feels like I'm forcing him to like something that I like, but I'm showing him, look, what you like is more important to me than what I like. And we'll bounce around and talk a little music, because he still really likes music, but I can tell that sports is his thing, and I can live that life. And he teaches me about sports, and he explains things to me that I have no clue. So it's actually rewarding to kind of not guide him into what I like, but to have him kind of point me into what he likes, and I can help him and encourage him and show him and just apply life lessons through the things that he likes.
I applaud your sensitivity that if he went a different direction, you'd be trying to figure out why he went that different direction and maybe try to pull him back, but you didn't. You listened. What were the forces were working on you that allowed you to be that sensitive? Because, I would think, I fought it for a while until my bride said, maybe that's not their passion.
Yeah. Well, remember, I didn't want him in the music industry. The way I was in the music industry before I got saved. So I think that from the beginning, I didn't want that for him. Now, don't get me wrong. Once I started teaching him, I was like, man, this is pretty cool that I get to teach this kid what I live and breathe, what I've lived and breathed for decades. But in the back of my mind, it was still got to be very careful, because this could lead him down a path that where you don't want him to go.
Right.
And even till this day, I still think about that, because he'll go, we DJ Chick-fil-A events, we DJ other types of events at churches, and I want to teach him the stuff, but I want to teach him to honor God with it, and he'll help me. But I'm knowing that if I'm not, if the wrong influences, that can also be used for the other side of the entertainment industry, which is what I don't want for him. But it all started with me not really wanting him, me wanting to protect him. So it wasn't that difficult for me to kind of let go and chase what he wanted.
Well, I'm
to
also
chase.
aware, you said you saw him, kind of make some motions that he wanted to be. So that physical presence is pretty, you were there physically with him to see that, which means that you were around, you were present in his life. Which is, of course, the first of the three pieces of being a faithful father. That
is extremely important for me. Love my dad, great man, hardworking man. I mean, I'm a borderline workaholic because that's what I saw, and I'll take that good. Right, we provide for our family.
We're supposed to work hard. We're just not supposed to be defined by our work.
Right, but then what I did see is that he was never around, and all I remember is him working and him getting home drunk on the weekends and my parents fighting. And occasionally he kind of wanted to learn paint and body work, and he would get me to help him a little bit. And that's really all I remember of my dad. Now we have a great relationship, and we get to talk about all kind of things. He's become a believer as well. But I wanted more than that for my son and my daughters. So
fantastic.
I intentionally, I used to work a corporate job, over six figures. And I would leave the house while he was asleep. And when I would get home, he was asleep. This is when he was a baby. And eventually I ended up making less money. And I would have to tell him from time to time, son, we just can't do that right now because of funds. And he would say, well, why don't you go back to your old job? And I had to explain to him that if I went to my old job, I wouldn't see him as much as I do. And at a very young age, he kind of got it. But I know that as he gets older, and I pray that as he gets older, he really values that, because I was raised, I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 40, and I was on my way to my way there, Rick.
That motivation is can be real, and like I say, so there's a sensitivity not only in your physical presence, but there's also an emotional engagement of what you're missing out on. But then later on in life, to be emotionally engaged enough to see that his interests weren't here; they were elsewhere. That's a significant level of sensitivity as well.
Right. Right.
Emotional. How do you consider yourself an emotional guy? Is that one of those manly terms that you relate to?
You know what? I actually am for a guy, I'm pretty emotional, Rick. I'm a softie, man. And what got me in trouble a lot is when I was a kid, I was part of my childhood was in Chicago, in a rough neighborhood in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I got involved in gangs early in life. And I acted like a tough guy, but I wasn't a tough guy. I was a softie. And
did you bluff in?
Yeah, I had to try to play that role. But yeah, that's.
Then of course you now are so you're physically present, you're emotionally engaged, and now you're leading him in a music world and a DJ world that's focused on Christian faith. At your Chick-fil-A and other events. Talk to that a little bit, that spiritual discipline and that spiritual leadership that you're providing in this industry.
It goes back to honoring God with our talents. God gave me those talents. I want to honor God, and I want to show my children how to honor God with whatever their talent is, whether it be sports, music, film. I don't know.
Corporate world.
But I want to be that example where I could have been. Rick, we were on our way to really making a lot of impact in the music scene. We were trailblazing for our time, the stuff we were doing, the artists we were working with. But God and I'm so grateful, God just stepped in and put a stop to all of it and drastically changed my life. I'm not saying I'm perfect, because if you guys know me, you know I'm nowhere near perfect, but God really stopped me in my tracks and pointed me in another direction. And I'm grateful because, like I told my son, I don't know where we would be. My wife and I would likely be divorced, and our kids would have to bounce around. And I know that's a reality for some people, and I don't knock that. I don't look down on that. But I have to remind my children that because God pulled me out of living life for me and my glory and my selfish ways, my greed, that is not the case for our family. And I know that's not the question you asked, but it kind of.
No, it's exactly where we're headed. I mean, I always like to back it up with scripture. We've talked about physical presence, emotional engagement, spiritual leadership, and I just always want to back that up, that we are to prioritize physical presence in family, because that's what was the Lord stated. Gospel of John says, John 1, 2, and 14 said, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, He was with God in the beginning, and then the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us." You know, if our Heavenly Father thought it important to send His Son to be with us physically, then us dads need to prioritize our physical presence. Absolutely. If we're going to get to know our kids as we need to know them. On the engaged emotionally, it says, Jesus Himself said, "If you love me, you will obey what I command, and I will ask the Father, and He will give you another counselor to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth." And here is the disciples well before 150 cable TV channels or cell phones or anything else. He knew they were going to be distracted because of the persecution ahead, and the world's going to be the world. But He sent a counselor to engage with them and remind them of His teaching. And so as dads, we ought to engage emotionally with our children to be on top of what they're being exposed to, what their bent is, and to empower them to be in a position to glorify the Father with their unique gifts. And then leading spiritually, Paul says in Romans Romans 12 that do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So Paul warns us of a seduction in the world that would say, hey, you are a God. You can be your own God and just keep doing what you're doing. But the Word tells us, no, we focus in on reflecting our relationship with Him in marriage, and then we work to raise this godly generation. And then finally, I think it's in John 14 where Philip says, well, Lord, why don't you just show us the Father, and then we'll believe. And he says, how can you say that? If you know me, you know the Father. Yeah. And so dads, that's your challenge across this Father's Day month, is get to use this time to be sure, in talking with your bride and doing the things that Robert has referred to. Know your children, know them well, and get to know them and be known by them, so that through that relationship you're honoring that relational model that Jesus set for us, that we lead in a way that points to the Father, and we live in a way that opens hearts to the Father. And that's what we're called to do as faithful fathers. Prioritize your physical presence, be engaged emotionally, lead spiritually by example. Again, best wishes for a blessed Father's Day month. Visit faithfulfathering.org for more tips on being the dad you're called to be, the dad the next generation needs to see. Robert, thanks so much for joining us. It's a blessing to have you.
Thank you, Rick.
God bless. Godspeed.